Hey guys, today I have with me quite an awesome haul from my friendly neighborhood collector store Robo here in Singapore. Now before we have a look at some of these figures, I just want to say please like, comment, share, subscribe, or even hit that super thanks button. All engagement is appreciated. So today we're going to have a look at the Spider-Man Noir. At the top of the box, we have that graffiti style spider logo from the Spider-Verse movie. Onto the bottom of the box, product information as usual. Down to the sides, we have artwork of Spider-Man Noir, and he's accompanied by Spider-Ham. Onto the back of the box. Now we have product pictures, and it shows you that he comes with an alternate head as well as a pistol. That pistol looks like an old-fashioned Luger. At the bottom of the box, we have more product information. Onto that final side of the box, we have renders of the figure in a more neutral stance, together with Spider-Ham. So let's go ahead and get this guy open. As with Hasbro's new plastic-free all-paper packaging, we have the accessories over here in this little baggie. And getting the accessories out of the bag, we have Spider-Ham, as well as his Luger and his alternate head. The main figure is on this cardboard insert. Parts of his plastic coat are inserted onto the sides of this cardboard, while his feet are held in place at the bottom. And just unwrapping the figure from his paper bag, and here he is. The Luger is cast in the black plastic with a very typical sculpt, like the skinny barrel, mechanical detail on the old school looking rest of the housing, and also a nice pistol grip with a crisscross pattern on the pistol grip for traction. Definitely holds this really cool old school Luger well in his right hand. What's cool is also his left hand is sculpted with a trigger finger, so you can also hold his pistol in his left hand. His belt also comes sculpted with a slightly disproportionately large holster that you can store his pistol in. Next up, for his alternate head, it appears to be exactly the same sculpt as his default head, just without that hat sculpted on. The alternate head is cast in a black plastic with a separate piece for his goggles. The goggles are also a black plastic with sharp white paint for those large expressive eyes. There's sculpted detail on the black head as well. These are for the web lines that are also painted with a gray paint. The gray paint seems to be sharp enough to cover those web lines as well. And if you look closer at his face, it's given that digital dot matrix printing for the gray shading, and that is very reminiscent of the art style from the Spider-Verse movie. The rest of his head is a smooth sculpt, and you can see that those lines and gray paint continues all the way to the back of the head as well. And of course that alternate head pops onto the figure just fine. However, I would say that I would much rather have Hasbro sculpt the figure with a removable hat. So you would actually save plastic, and you could have the figure handle his hat as a separate accessory as well. And for his last accessory, it is Spider-Ham. And this is exactly the same sculpt that came with the previous Spider-Ham packed together with Spider-Gwen. This time Spider-Ham has a brighter shade of red for the plastic that he's cast in, and he's also got a deeper shade of blue paint for the rest of his outfit. I just like to point out that I did draw in those web lines with a Gundam panel marker for the previous Spider-Ham. And it's still disappointing to receive that same exact sculpt of Spider-Ham without the web lines drawn in. The new Spider-Ham's color is more accurate to the movie. However, I do feel he's simply added to this figure pack just to make up that so-called value on this action figure that is now coming in at a deluxe price point. There's really no difference in the sculpting of the figure. I just feel like the blue paint applied on this new figure is glossy and makes it look cheaper as compared to the matte blue paint on the previous version. The blue paint also doesn't look like it's well applied, not going to the edges of those lines in his outfit, as compared to the previous version, which really looks quite neat. The Spider-Ham figure still has only one point of articulation, and that's the ball joint at his neck that gets you to spin his head all the way around and also get some tilting action. And being exactly the same figure, it also suffers from the same shortcomings. The head is really huge, and that affects his balance. So there's no real way to pose him with his head tilted upwards or looking at certain angles, because that really just messes with the balance of the figure. So I'll say that I'm quite disappointed with the accessories that comes with this figure, especially at its elevated price point. He should have come with some alternate fists, because in the movie he actually used his fists quite a bit during the fight scenes. I do have a fix for that. You can probably swap his hands with the fists that came with the Marvel Legends Havoc. Alternatively, you could use the fists that come with the black suited symbiote Spidey. These fists are exactly the same sculpt as the ones that come on the Havoc figure, which probably doesn't have these white rectangle shapes painted on the back of the hand. That could be a bit distracting. But these fists work fine with the figure, and definitely makes it more expressive, just like how he was in the fight scenes in the movie. This Spider-Man Noir is a completely brand new sculpt, and it's cast in mostly black plastic as well, with a little bit of paint detail here and there, and also different treatments of the textures of the plastic in order to make this look interesting. He's also got the pinless joint technologies, so you don't see any of those unsightly pins on his elbows or his knees. His head sculpt is made from a couple of pieces, with the main black plastic for his head, separate black plastic goggles painted in white for the big eyes, as well as a separate hat that's attached to the top of his head. The sculpting and paintwork for his face and goggles are exactly the same as his alternate head sculpt, but this time with his hat on top. It's sculpted with a couple of details like the band that goes all the way around, and that band is also a shiny black plastic. I'm not sure if it's painted, but that contrasts with the rougher texture of the rest of the hat. There's also some grey paint for the shading and the dots, so that's really representative of the art style in the movie. Onto his torso, he's got a separate plastic for his turtleneck color. The rest of his shirt is a smooth black sculpt. He's got the plastic trench coat on, and that really accentuates his larger stature and broad shoulders. The high collar over here also has a couple of nicely sculpted details on the inside, like the stitching for the hemlines. On the outside of the coat, there's also the same grey paint for shading, more stitch detail on his shoulders, as well as the front of his chest. More sculpted details for the buttons down the front of the trench coat. His arms are sculpted with sleeves. These sleeves are sculpted with a couple of folds for the fabric, and also have that subtle grey shading on the bottom of his forearms, as well as sculpted detail for the ends of the sleeves. On the back of the coat, there's more sculpted detail and stitching. The belt for the trench coat is also a separate piece that is glued on, with cool sculpted detail for the loops and how the rest of the belt folds as it flails in the wind. It's a flexible plastic, so you can move and pose it around. The rest of the trench coat is pretty rigid and has the same folds sculpted in them. So the rest of the coat is really sculpted, flailing in the wind, quite dramatic. And maybe for this price point, Hasbro could have afforded to give us a fabric coat with posable wires in them, so that we can pose it dramatically for action figure photos, or maybe just straight down for more neutral stances. It's possible to remove the coat from the figure so you can have a better look at the rest of the details on his bare torso. Once again, it's also smoothed down the back, and now without the trench coat on, he actually loses that intimidating stature, and his main body looks quite skinny. I do like how his belt is sculpted, with the buckle in the middle, and the more glossy black plastic for the belt itself. It comes equipped with a couple of pouches down the sides, and these pouches are a more matte finish, kind of having a little bit of texture, so that the entire black belt looks interesting. Down to his legs, and this is where having an entirely black figure, Hasbro needs to work on the look and finish of the black plastic. So from his waist down, he's supposed to be wearing pants. However, there is a slight difference in the consistency of the plastic on the crotch piece as compared to his hip pieces and the rest of his legs. So even though it's subtle, I think Hasbro should have used a more consistent black plastic for the figure from his waist down. His legs are also well sculpted, with details like the pockets down the sides, as well as the seam line down the front that moves into the insides of his thighs. Once again, there's also that subtle grey shading on the bottom of the front of his thighs. There's also a more baggy sculpt on the top part of his legs, with a couple of folds for the fabric. And you can see that the rest of his lower legs are a more sleek, slim sculpt to show that he's wearing knee-high leather boots. However, even though those boots are made of leather, you can't really tell from the texture because it looks exactly the same texture and finish as the top part of his legs. So Hasbro could have worked more on his lower legs to make them more glossy and shiny. Down to his ankles, there's also quite a bit of sculpting to show the wrinkles in his boots. And finally, he does have quite sleek black feet, with a more angular sculpt on the tip of his shoes, just to show off the really nice and cool sculpt of his whole knee-high boots. For articulation, he's got a double ball dumbbell joint on his neck, with one ball joint that goes into his head and the other into the bottom of his neck. So that gets you quite a bit of good tilting action sideways. He lets you also spin his head 360. He looks down just that much, and also up. And that's also partially hindered by his high collar of his trench coat. He's got a swivel hinge at the shoulders that go 360, and they also come out pretty far beyond 90 degrees. He's got an upper bicep swivel for 360, double jointed pinless elbows, so that's very good range. Swivel hinge at the wrist that spins 360 and articulates inwards as well as outwards, which is a bit strange for trigger hands that could actually be articulated up and down instead. He's got a mid-torso hinge for the ab crunch, crunching forward quite a good bit, but there's not much backward when it's hindered by the trench coat. He's got a waist swivel so that spins him 360, ball joints at the hips, and that's quite a good spread sideways. No problems forward and backward as well. Thigh swivel for 360 spin. Double hinge pinless knees, and that's quite good range. Even though he's wearing boots, there's no calf swivel. And he's got ankle tilt upwards, downwards, and very generous ankle pivot outwards as well as inwards. The dramatic sculpt of the trench coat does let you get as much range as possible from his pretty standard Marvel Legends articulation scheme, which is a bit of a departure from the usual restrictive trench coat sculpts that we've seen from Hasbro before. However, as with all plastic trench coats, they do mess with the balance of the figure sometimes, so it might be a little challenging to pose the figure in more dynamic stances. Spider-Man Noir stands at almost 6¾ inches, and that's about 17 centimeters. Here he is with the other Hasbro Marvel Legends versions of the characters from the Spider-Verse movie. Here he is with a couple of other Spider-Man action figures. And here he is with a couple of Spider-Man villains. For comparisons with other lines, here he is with some G.I. Joe Classified series and some Star Wars Black series. The Spider-Man Noir action figure itself is great. I don't mind the rigid plastic cape, while the paint and plastic textures add quite distinct features despite most of it being made from black plastic. However, the accessories provided are extremely weak, especially at this new high price point. I think Hasbro got lazy with accessories and decided that collectors would just buy this because of the popularity of the movie, and the previous Marvel Legends version of Spider-Man Noir is already pretty hard to get. I'm still happy to add this to my collection of Spider-Verse movie figures, but it's quite hard to recommend you to buy this at full retail price. Please like and share this video, let me know what you think in the comments below, subscribe to my channel, or even hit the super thanks button. Thanks for watching, take care and stay safe.